I am unashamed. What about you?
All right, welcome back to Unashamed. Jace, you're wearing an Unashamed shirt. I like that.
Yeah.
That's some of our merch.
Thought I'd put
which is
my
good.
shirt where my mouth is.
There you go. PhilMerch.com, by the way, for those of you that are watching. If you like Jace's shirt, you can buy one just like it. We just got some new stuff we'll be sporting. Dad, you were telling us before we came on air that Bobo number 6 had some issues there.
Yeah, he lost during the night fighting the probably a possum or maybe an armadillo, maybe a neighbor's dog. He came up with one of his toenails missing, had a little blood coming out of him. So, when a dog of 5-6 generations loses a toenail, there's a scramble among the women.
What are we gonna do?
Huh?
I mean, do they have toenail replacement?
Oh, I don't know, but I'm sure that they've come up with something. I mean, the women rally to let's take them to the doctor. Let's take them to the vet.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, so over a toenail?
Oh.
Well, which can be
A
painful.
lot less than that. I mean,
But he's a dog, Yeah,
they're a dog. I treat them like a dog, but
I would say on a toenail that he would be all right without the doctor visit.
it'll slowly heal.
Yeah, I mean, he just...
It's out of place. It's,
Well, what I think...
dogs' feet fit, the toenails are kind of tight fitting. One of these is out hard left.
One of the fastest dogs I ever seen had 3 legs.
Yep.
So I'm saying it could have been worse.
That's right.
And
The
if
toenail was still there, but it was at the hanging stage, so it had torn loose some little cartilage, whatever,
that's
in between a dog's toenails. It's supposed to be pretty tight packed,
Yeah.
You look at a dog's track in the dirt, it's out there. It's not one over on the left shooting out over there. That one there. He got into a fight with something, or maybe barbed wire. I don't know.
This is country living, Phil, when the biggest drama going on is one of your dogs lost a toenail.
Bobo lost his toenail. I mean, they brought him to me. He's sitting up there looking at me. Like I did something.
Help me.
Yeah, help me. I just take the tape that glues itself together, the kind of stretch tape that you use on your arm when you're working on you. I found a roll of that, and I just roll the whole thing up, kind of like a tight pad.
Yeah.
And if he leaves it like that 6 weeks, it'll grow back together. But he'll go to the vet,
That's interesting because that was pretty much your approach for any injuries that we had as children.
Yep.
Was just put a little tape on it, a little butterfly,
I came home one night and they got Jace and they said, oh, he hurt his arm, but he'll be all right. I said, come over here. So he held out his arm like that. I said, yeah, he ran into a little, I said, how about it's broken in 2 places and you need to get him to the doctor immediately.
I've been in pain for 3 days.
Yeah. They were like, yeah, he hurt his arm a little bit there.
The first thing they
I
did.
said, hold your arm out there, son. He held it up. I said, yeah, he got a little pain in his arm. I said, he's broken it in a couple of places here.
Yeah, the bones were kind of protruding out, but
Yeah.
Kay kept saying, no, it's just a sprain. And, so what the bad thing was is the first thing they had to do was re-break it.
Yeah.
Which was very excruciating.
Oh,
I was like, hey, knock me out next time.
You wore a cast around there for a while.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And just
So what happened over the course of time that as children that we needed medical attention and didn't get it, but now dogs break their toenails in this immediate trip to the what happened?
Yeah, I think you should have. I would have offered a pushback on the toenail trip. To the doctor.
Oh, they had they'd already made up their mind. It's vet. Go to the vet. Go to the vet is kind of like a big deal with them.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm all for going to the vet, but I don't know about over a toenail.
It probably has something to do with funding, Jace. We probably didn't have as much funding back in the day, so it was probably a more of a financial call. I don't know.
Exactly.
The nail was still hooked to the bone, the bone in there. It's hooked to it good. But the bone is where the problem is. It's kind of at the flopping stage. It's torn loose.
Yeah.
But
I thought I was going to go to the hospital last night. We were keeping the little one, and his favorite song that I play. We have dance time. I mean, this is like I'm going back to when I had little kids, and I play that "Staying Alive," and it's just because when he would be, what they call the witching hours, the last 2 hours before he goes to bed. It's always difficult because it's been a long day, and so Missy would always give him to me. That's my turn because she's like, I've been dealing with this all day. It's your turn. So I was trying to find, everybody's got to have a song or you got a walk-up song. I mean, and you learn that at an early age. Well, he likes that Staying Alive. The Bee Gees, you remember that? The guys, I got the high voice, whatever.
Oh, yeah.
And so when I play that song, I mean, he dances, the whole time. He gets excited. And so I was laughing. Missy was talking, and he's got the song going, and it's loud. And he likes to bang, like, the drums. So one of the presents he got for his birthday was he likes to pound the table. And he was excited, and I was distracted. And so he went to pound the couch, but I was laying on the couch, and he hit me below the equator, full extension.
Yeah.
And I mean, I blacked out in pain, just writhing.
You're kind of like them NFL boys when that happened. They're trying to get over there without anybody noticing and getting on the bench, but it's a tough walk.
It's tough. And Missy was laughing at first. And then she was like, do you need some help? And I was thinking, should I say call 911? Because, it just takes time to recover. But I was like, no, I think I'm going to make it. But you wouldn't understand, obviously.
Well, and that's what happens when you're a dad and then later a granddad. Your kids reach a certain height when they come up to get your attention. And they're just the right height when they go to, hey, Dad, or hey, Pap.
Right.
And they're just that right height. And, it's a dangerous
Well, that's what I was saying. When you go back in to the small kid, I was so removed from it. Because now if he comes toward me, I got my head on a swivel. Yeah, that won't happen again.
We used to have the Louisiana dog. It's the Louisiana dog, what do you call them?
Louisiana dog. Cur dog?
Yeah, Catahoula cur.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That still is, I think, the Louisiana's, what they call it.
The official dog, of Louisiana.
Dog. Catahoula cur. So I've owned some before, but they make good dogs, good yard dogs.
Yeah.
They have the glassy eyes.
Not much needed necessarily on injuries. They very seldom had an injury. If they died a violent death, big trucks, tractors, or a herd of bad dogs. So they bumped them off one at a time.
We decided to do a series on, or what are we going to call this? I Am series?
I think it's the I Am series.
I mean, it's the greatest nickname ever. For any human. I mean, a nickname is probably, I don't want to make it sound even sacrilegious, but I mean, that's what he went by. I mean, we're going to prove that to you.
And it made me think about something, Jay. So a couple of things I thought of before we get into the more serious part of the I Ams is that, our family and nicknames, we've talked about this a lot because Dad's has a long history of giving people nicknames. And another person that does it is Willie, and he's big about giving people little names, usually not very flattering names, and he likes to irritate with his nickname. So all of my grandkids, he's come up with names that he loves to torture them with, and he usually tries to find something that he knows will irritate them. And so every time they come over to his house or he comes to my house, he likes to have something that he knows will get under their skin. It's just the way he is. I mean, we all know he's been doing it since he was a kid. And BK, Bullfrog is what Dad calls her, because she's got big eyes, I guess.
There's another nickname I didn't think
Which
about.
Which is another nickname, this bullfrog, is so BK, when she was young, I guess she was maybe 7 or 8 years old. Some of her little friends were with her. And so we were filming the show, the duck show back then. So she was with some of us. Well, they didn't know because she wasn't on the show. And obviously they didn't know she was connected to us. And so she was with somebody in the family. And so like when whoever that was left, they looked at BK, and now she's like 7 or 8. She's 15 now. She's 7 or 8 at the time. And they said, "Do you know the Duck Dynasty people?" And of course, it kind of offended her because it's her family. And she said, "I am the Duck Dynasty people." Well, when that story got back to Willie, of course, from that point to this day, whenever he sees BK, he says, "BK, do you know the Duck Dynasty people?" He does it in his little voice. And of course, now he's done it for so many years that she won't even acknowledge it. She just ignores it.
I wonder if she got that from just hearing Bible class about the I am, or it was.
Well, I don't know. I thought that was it popped into my brain when we were studying for this series, because I thought about it, that it was so funny because it was an I am statement. It was like, "Don't you know I am?" And even at 7 years old, she got it. It was a definitive statement.
Well, I was so upset last night when I was studying for this because, so in all the research, and we'll decide to do something, a book, or like in this case, which is a famous. Now you had it like the 7 I am statements. Well, I read them. I'm like, well, you missed one. And then I realized later, well, you missed another one. But I didn't realize that. So there are 7 I am statements where Jesus used a metaphor.
Yeah, they're metaphorical. That's right.
So they have, because I didn't know that was a thing. But there's actually 9 I am statements that we'll cover that Jesus made. 7
in the book of John.
Yeah, in the metaphor category. And the other 2, which I really think are the most profound. They're all profound. So I was studying that. Well, I didn't realize, because I'm a big Chosen fan, the show The Chosen. And I didn't realize that there's a little controversy about this line in The Chosen. So at the time I stumbled up on it, so this guy had written the article because they had just seen a trailer of the season 3. Well, season 3 is out now. And it's been out. So at the end of the trailer, because I had to go back and watch the trailer, I'm like, what are they talking about? So Jesus makes this statement on that show. It says, "I am the law of Moses." I actually saw that episode. I think it's season 3, episode 3, where he says that. And it comes from that when Jesus went back to his hometown and an argument arose, and he didn't have any honor, and then they were actually wanting to kill him after he claimed to, have this authority over the law and the prophets and act like he's from God. And so that's where they ran that in there. So I was like, well, what is the controversy about this? Well, and I'm saying a little bit because they just said, well, that line actually doesn't appear in the Bible. They made that up. So I thought, well, I think they missed it. All I think that controversy did was show me that there are still people with Pharisee tendencies today.
So, Jace, you know what I love about it? We're all involved in the pro-life movement in different ways, and you and Missy have put yourselves out there and taken a child to help be a part of his life from now on. And you guys, even though things have changed in terms of your direct involvement, you guys are still engaged, right? And you're engaged for life.
Oh, speaking of engagement, so he's just over a year old, and he's been taking 2 or 3 steps and then saying, "Oh, wait a minute," and plop down. Yesterday, 18 steps.
The furthest she's ever gone.
18 steps. And you would have thought that we were at some kind of arena where, this is just,
Home run,
here we
touchdown.
go. High fives, everybody holler. So, yeah, it was a cool moment.
So this is the beauty of the pro-life movement, and I think that's a great illustration of our involvement, is that we're more than interested in just getting babies born. We're interested in getting babies not only born, but having a fulfilled life. And so one of our sponsors is a group called 40 Days for Life, and they're very active and engaged in the pro-life movement. They have 1 million volunteers in 1,500 cities. They're the largest pro-life organization in the world, and they're in the best position to end abortion in post-Roe America. And so we love what they do. They have 40-day peaceful vigils. They offer love and hope outside abortion facilities. They've helped save over 23,000 babies. They've converted over 250 abortion workers. And so we love joining with what these guys are doing. And we want you to check out what they're doing. Check out their locations, their podcast. They have a free magazine. If you go to 40daysforlife.com, stay updated on what they're doing. That's 40daysforlife.com. Check them out. Get engaged. Get involved in the pro-life movement.
So I usually try to stay away from controversy, but I just thought I would try to take that on. And I wanted to, as a way to introduce this, and I'll kind of give y'all my take on it. Because basically what I wrote down without studying, just when we decided to do this, I just thought, things change in life. We talk about that before in marriage. As the best advice that you can give is trying to explain to people that are not married, that are fixed to get married, that things are going to change. Of course, a young couple, they're like, oh yeah, we got it. But it's life is unpredictable. Marriage is unpredictable. So you contrast that by Hebrews 13:8, that says Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. And he's made these statements where he says, I am. And so he does it a lot of times when it comes to his character, or it may be time related. I mean, obviously it's a time statement. I am present, but it's also, we know that he's not going to change into some, poor character specimen. I mean, it embodies a lot to make that statement, I am, which that's why I said it's the greatest nickname ever. I had a couple of verses that, just speaking in light of this little controversy that arose, in Luke 4:16 and through 23, I was just going to make the point that when Jesus said that he didn't come to, or maybe Matthew 5 would be the best one. He didn't come to abolish the law, but he came to fulfill it. Where's that at? That's on the Sermon on the Mount, right?
Yeah, that's
Matthew 5:17.
Matthew 5.
He said, don't think I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. So I think this is one of the few times that he uses a reference of the law and the prophets in the same sentence like that. Because you think about how many times, I think fulfillment is mentioned. How many times in Matthew? Several. So
a bunch.
And he would say,
it's a major theme. Yeah,
I would do this to fulfill prophecy. But he's also saying here, I have come to fulfill the law. And so obviously these people that took on the chosen, they didn't like that. And I read their arguments. And look, I think their heart was in the right place. I think they were just sincerely mistaken, because they want to keep the law of Moses. And so they're like, well, Jesus made references to it, so he wasn't. But the more I got to thinking about it, and even, so I had the passage, the Luke 4, I have that in here for some reason, so I wanted to read that. I can't remember what it said. Luke 4:16 through 23.
Jesus' point was to them was that there's only one person that will ever be the one who wrote it, the law of Moses, and the only one that's ever kept it. And he was in the process of keeping it when they said we're going to kill him because of it.
All right.
It's a tough little back and forth there.
Well, you're right. I'll skip
If you
to
wrote
the end.
something and you lived by it, and you never broke one of your statutes, that is pulling off a major thing that no one has ever done but this one.
Well, right. But
So somewhere in there, one of the reasons I can keep it is I wrote it.
Well, that's what I was fixed to say. I'll skip to the end of this argument. After I read all this stuff, I mean, it's 2 or 3 hours of my life I'll never get back. But I just thought to myself, well, who wrote the law of Moses?
That's right.
So even if you just do a search on the internet and say, who wrote the law of Moses? Well,
do you realize
people say, well, Moses, Jase. But when you read that, then it'll say, as revealed by God.
That's
Yeah.
right.
Okay, so when you think about that and you read Exodus 31:18, so when he had these 2 tablets, it actually says this before I read the Luke 4. It says that came from the fingertip of God. That's the quote, Exodus 31. Well, when did God have a finger? Oh, he became a man in Jesus, right? Well, before Jesus became a man, he's God, right?
That's it.
That's why he made these statements about, I've sent you these prophets. So, Al, we brought up where he said in Luke 10, I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven.
Yeah.
Well, how could you say something like that? And I've been sending you all these prophets. I think that's, was it Matthew 24? And then he's like, I'm going to continue to send them. But he's like, you've killed them, you keep killing them.
Right.
Well, how do you know? And even, the famous one in John 8, they were arguing about Abraham. He's like, well, before Abraham was, I am.
Mm-hmm.
So when you think about it, the chosen taking a moment when Jesus' authority was questioned, for Jesus to say, oh, I am the law of Moses. That was a correct conclusion.
And look, and when it gets to the passage of time, Jesus said, I'm the marker. I'm the one where time came from. There was a time for the human race that they didn't have a way of counting time from this year to that year to that. You say, Jesus comes along clear, and we've been counting time by him ever since.
Yeah. Well, that's why it
You
said.
say, well, what would we call all the time before Jesus got here? You would call that all the time before Jesus got here. I mean, you just think about how hard that would be to do.
Well, exactly. Well, let me read this Luke 4, because this is where the argument came from, but I just wanted to read it. So in verse 16, he went to Nazareth, where he had been brought up. This is Jesus. And on the Sabbath day, he went to the synagogue, as was his custom, and he stood up to read. So he starts reading about Isaiah. The Spirit of the Lord is on me, because he has anointed me to preach the good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, to release the oppressed, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. So then he rolled that scroll up. That was Isaiah 61, 1 and 2. And he makes a statement in verse 21, because you said, why did all this escalate when he went to Nazareth? Well, here was the statement. Today, which is why I opened this with Jesus Christ, said he's the same yesterday and today and forever. So he says, today, this scripture is fulfilled in your hearing. Now, you say, what is the big deal? Why did they get angry at that? Because he's saying, Isaiah is talking about me. The law is talking about me. I'm fulfilling the law and the prophets. And so, like I just said, if you go back in time, you realize that God, Jesus, and the Holy Spirit, you go all the way back to Genesis 1 in the creation, it said, let us make man in our image. when you have the law being written or revealed to Moses, well, who wrote the law? God, Jesus, the Holy Spirit. What are you talking about? So it's like you didn't think anything about that BK when she said, "Hey, I am, the duck people." I mean, because she's like, "This is my family," and it's the same concept here. I think the problem with the Pharisee mind in the religious group is they're putting too much limitation, or they're trying to understand with feeble human brains how God is. I mean, he is a being that's eternal that became a man, but it didn't mean that he was unaware of the law of Moses before he became a human being. It's just dumb. It's dumb. It's not putting an application on the power and the depth of God. It's too limiting. So I think the Chosen got it right. I think the scoffers have it wrong. And in that moment, I think, what you're watching at the show, it's not a literal interpretation of the Bible. It's a view of God becoming a human. And so, and letting your imagination and allowing you to think is part of the draw of the show. But that's what we do every day, even in this discussion. Is
That's right.
You study the scriptures and you grow and you stretch and you disagree on things, but you're open-minded, and because it's hard to wrap your head around the awesomeness of God. I mean, just even in making these statements, this is quite the venture to explore a person who says, "Hey, you can call me I am."
No, it's a great point, Jace, because it's the words "I am the law of Moses" are not specifically in Scripture spoken by Jesus in red letters, but it is all over the Scriptures that Jesus is the law of Moses because he wrote it, which is a great. I mean, if you were going to characterize, from the John 21 passage, that there's so many other things that Jesus did, there's not enough books to record them all. If you were going to come up with things just from reading all the scriptures that Jesus could have said, that could have been one of them that he said. So you're right. It is kind of comical that the modern Pharisaical mindset is still alive and well, and they've managed to capture that by these silly arguments that's controversial that Jesus would say that in this, stylized, piece of film that you're watching. I mean, I just find it interesting. Yeah.
Well, you think about the difference, what this means, these statements, I am. And even like I said, I think the Chosen got it right. And just as an illustration of that, before we started filming today, I mean, Phil was talking about this same concept, and he's like, Jesus, the more you look, you see that Jesus is at the center of everything.
Yep.
So all that statement was yes, Jesus is in his hometown in this moment that they're felt, but he was in the center of every possible thing you could think of since the creation of the world. That he was there at the center as
of which he is the creator.
He is creator, and it's like I heard the U2 singer who's a believer, Bono, was talking about, they asked him a few years ago, and I've run across this at some point, like how they were trying to get him that the Old Testament is so R-rated, I guess, and he's like, well, it makes sense to me in that when you're a kid, and he's like, the children of God back then, they needed a firm hand, and he's like, I kind of view the Old Testament as an action movie, and it was all about awe and worship, and he said it was vertical. They're looking up and worshiping God, kind of out of fear, because he's saying, here's what I want you to do. He said, but then Jesus came along, and all of a sudden it became more vertical, where you can actually look and you see the love. It wasn't that God didn't love in the Old Testament, he was just given a portrayal of his character and right and wrong, And I thought it was an interesting take in that there was love in that and love, in Jesus. But of course, the guy interviewing him was like, what do you even say about that? And
Cuckoo for Cocoa
where's that
Puffs.
text?
But my point is the U2 singer, which is believer. I was trying to get to the point that the implications of believing Jesus is the I am of God is that no other religious founder said, well, there's a God and you're looking at him. They always say, here's how you get to God. Here's the truth that will set you free. And Jesus, by declaring he is the way, the truth, and life, he's actually introducing the idea, and him being eternal, that I'm finding you. I came to find you. So you think about how big a difference that is. I mean, you have Jesus over here, and you have every other religious group over on the other side. It's the complete polar opposite. Was my point. No other religious leaders claiming to be the I am. So, what was you saying, Phil?
I just want to make a point that I was trying to look for that verse, that one of the things said about him, as you're just reading through, when you get to buildings and all this and the temple and all that, somewhere it said, I can't find it, but he's the builder of everything.
No, that's Hebrews 3:4.
Yeah.
No, it says every house. No, it's a great point because he's contrasting with Moses on who's better, because they were like, well, we believe in Moses.
Yeah.
Which is great to what this argument in. You know what he's saying? I am Moses. I created Moses. And he says every house is built by someone.
That's my point.
God is the builder of everything. So the final
you say time, final word, Jesus. You say builder of everything. Yes, that's Jesus.
It's what he was saying. But if he said that, we'd say, what? Why would he say that? So, yeah, that's even why, even in Hebrews 11, when you have the hall of faith, when he gets together at the end with everybody and he makes it present, the Hebrew writer, he's actually doing something that just is a brain teaser, because he's like, he's given the idea that Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever, that his death on a cross not only went forward from a human's mindset to deliver the sins, not only did it forgive the present people who actually that he prayed, he said, Father, forgive them, but it went back to the people of faith. The cross did that in that moment, because he said, only together with us would they be made perfect, which is, well, where did he get that idea? He got that idea from Jesus saying, oh yeah, about Abraham, before he was born, I am. He made that statement.
Yep.
That's John chapter.
Yeah, John 8.
John 8.
So to both your points, and that was really good explanation leading up to it, Jace, because really the thing about the chosen is the basis for which we begin this, because the Jewish mindset that Jesus is talking to throughout this whole book of John, where we get into these metaphors, it actually starts way back in Exodus 3, because they totally understand the concept of I am because of the burning bush and Moses, right? I mean, that's where we first see this concept. Moses has, obviously he was a sort of a miraculous survivor. He had been raised in the house of Pharaoh. We know he was pegged to be God's deliverer of the people out of Egypt, but he goes through this whole thing about not being ready, and so he's out in the desert for 40 years, and he sees this burning bush, and he's called to it, and so he goes there, and the voice literally calls him out of the bush and says, Moses, in verse 4 of Exodus 3, and Moses says, here I am, which is kind of interesting because here I am. And the voice says, do not come any closer. take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground, meaning that the presence of God is near. And this is going to be a concept we're going to see throughout. And then he says, the voice says, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. And then if you drop down to verse 13, Moses says to God, because he describes a little bit about that, concept to get him here. And he says, he's telling him what he needs to do. And Moses says, suppose I go to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you. And they ask, what is his name? Then what shall I tell him? And God says to Moses, I am who I am. This is what you are to say to the Israelites. I am has sent me to you.
And the Apostle Paul cleared up a lot of who in the world, what is all this about? Acts 17, verse 24, just a few things. The God who made the world, just think about that, and everything in it is the Lord of heaven and earth. He's talking about Jesus, and does not live in temples built by hands. He's not served by human hands as if he needed anything. He himself gives all men life and breath and everything else. Now you just look at that part of him. From one man, he made every nation of men, that they should inhabit the whole earth. He determined the time set for them, the exact places where they should live. He did it so people would seek him and find him. He ends it up by saying he's given proof of this. He has set a day when he will judge the world, that's everything there is, with justice by the man he has appointed, and we're down to I am again. He's given proof of this to all men by raising him from the dead. You're like, death? No, he beat that too. There's just nothing that he doesn't control, Al. Absolutely nothing.
Correct. And to Jase's point earlier, when the voice of God was speaking to Moses through that bush, Jesus was there as well, because we know from all the other passages in the New Testament that Jesus has been there all along. And so he hadn't become flesh yet. That comes later at the appointed time, but he was there. So he can say that he was there from the very beginning, and he was right there with God, with Yahweh, speaking through that bush that I am. And so when you get over to John chapter 8, and he's having this discussion about Abraham, which was before Moses, and they're saying, we're the children of Abraham. Who do you think you are? And, you're saying that Abraham looked to you, and Abraham was way before you are. How are you saying all that? And he says, look, before Abraham was born, I am. He's referring back to this same idea and this same statement, as we said earlier. I mean, it is an I am statement. And of course, their reaction, they got it because, and it's also kind of crazy, because he was saying in that moment, I am the I am. And their reaction was it was so strong to them that they picked up stones to kill him.
Yeah.
That's how visceral and how strong the reaction was.
That's why the Chosen got that right. Because look, you could do the same thing about Jonah. You remember when he made reference in Luke 11, where he's like, this is verse 29, when he said, for as Jonah, or verse 30 of Luke 11, for as Jonah was assigned to the Ninevites, so also will be the Son of Man be to this generation. And then he starts getting graphic. What happened with the, Jonah and the whale? I mean, you know what he said here? I am Jonah. I'm greater than Jonah. That's what he said in verse 32. The men of Nineveh will stand up at the judgment with this generation and condemn it, for they repented at the preaching of Jonah. And now one greater than Jonah is here. And I just keep going back to he's the fulfillment of this. Where did all this get started with Moses? I mean, there was a couple of points as you were reading that stood out. What caught his attention? Well, there's a bush that's on fire, and he's looking at it. And he said in verse 2 and 3 of Exodus 3, I'm going to go over here and see why this bush doesn't burn up. So just think that's where this gets started. You got a bush burning, but it won't burn up. That would catch my attention. I mean, my imagination would be running wild. And so then all of a sudden, it starts talking. And his response is what ours should be when he said, "Who am I?" in verse 11. Who am I? And so what God did was answer that in the reverse when he says, "I am who I am," which is who am I? I am who. And I think that's the perspective that I was trying to zero in on why Jesus is different. Because a lot of people say, "Oh, I believe in the teachings of Jesus, but I'm not sure he was the Son of God." Look, that's way more prevalent than you realize. That's how people think. And I'm like, you've missed the whole point. It's the same way I felt about these people criticizing that app. They're quick to criticize because people are trying to read the Bible and dot all the I's and connect the cross the T's. And they're missing, Jesus is even bigger than the box that they have him in. They're just not running the application all the way out. So if you're defending the law of Moses, you've missed something. I mean, you really are. Because people go to the Sermon on the Mount and they basically turn it into, I'm saying modern day, into what he was chastising them for. It's just hilarious to me. It's like, I've suffered through those in church. We're going to do a series on the Sermon on the Mount. I'm like wanting to raise my hand. I'm like, I think you missed the point on this. He wasn't trying to give you 12 different views of 12 different rules that we now must keep. I mean, he was saying, I came to fulfill. But he was being so, he was illustrating and going over and beyond his point because they were justifying themselves for keeping the whole law. And he's like, yeah, but if, even if you are mad at your brother, you're violating the whole law. He was trying to show humans that they should be asking the same thing Moses. I mean, who am I? And because when you realize who Jesus says he is, he is. So you just point to him. When people come to you and they're attacking you, you're pointing to Jesus because he's the greatest being that you could ever construct, which is the whole point of having the I am nickname. It is the ultimate nickname of all nicknames. It shows that you're completely superior. I mean, the whole book of Hebrews, that's basically all it's saying. Here's about 15 reasons on why he's better.
No, I agree, Jase, and which is why we kept looking at those copies and shadows, because you see Jesus all over it. I mean, when you go back and you look at the life of Moses and you see he was saved as a child and they were killing the babies. And then you go to Abraham and you see that Isaac was the only son and he was sacrificed. I mean, all the symmetry and the pictures are there. The Jewish mindset especially, they got every aspect of this. And so by the time the Hebrew writer comes along and writes that book, the Jewish mindset, they understood, if they had an open heart, that Jesus really was the fulfillment of all of this. And so us looking back in time, we are certainly able to see how clear the pathway was that Jesus really is the I am. There's no doubt about it.
Well, we mentioned the John 8 where he said, and we'll mention that in more detail in because we're going to have a series on this, but I wanted to bring up the John 18 because when you first sent me the 7 I ams, which I didn't realize we were doing that, the metaphorically times that he said I am, I said, well, we need to add another one. And Al was like, do what? Because I read
what you said was you said, I've got a mystery I am. And I said, ooh, I love a good mystery.
I do have a mystery I am, and here was my take. But what's funny is I said, I'm not going to tell you. I'll wait and discuss it. But then when I read, Al had a few notes about it. Well, he had already brought this up, so it's not a mystery. But what I find fascinating is John 18. So this is right before Jesus dies and goes through the trials and all. and I'll just read it because he says, when he had finished, John 18:1, when he had finished praying, Jesus left with his disciples, crossed over to the Kidron Valley. On the other side, there was an olive grove, and he and the disciples went into it. Now, Judas, who betrayed him, knew the place because Jesus had often met there with his disciples. So Judas came to the grove, guiding a detachment of soldiers. That's going to be a key thing to ponder. And some officials from the chief priests and Pharisees. They were carrying torches, lanterns, and weapons. So here comes a military platoon and a mob. Jesus, knowing all that was going to happen to him, went out and asked them, "Who is it you want?" So he already knew, but he's just playing along. "Jesus of Nazareth," they replied. Well, here's why I call this a mystery. So you see these next three words, "I am he." Well, if you go look at the original Greek language, the word "he's" not there.
Correct.
They just put it there because, which it just doesn't infuriate me, but it makes me angry. Because they missed the point that this is his name. I am. It's so much more cool if you read all the other I ams, and if you just don't put the he there. Because they're doing it because it's not grammatically correct they're implying, oh, I am he. But he just said
they were doing it as a grammatical qualifier to answer the question, but you're right. It's not in the actual language. It's just there. I am. That's right.
He said, I am. So they said, we're looking for Jesus of Nazareth. I am. So you see how the translators, they thought, well, that didn't make sense. Of course it doesn't make sense because he is I am. That's his other name. He's already said that. It makes
perfect sense.
It makes perfect sense. You should have just left it alone. That's why I called it a mystery, Al, because he just said I am.
Yeah.
But I agree. The translators put the he in there, so you'll see it in parentheses. And he says it two more times. Look, Jesus said, and Judas the traitor was standing there with them when Jesus said, I am he. Well, he didn't say that. He said, I am. So you see where this is going. They drew back and fell to the ground.
Which is the really intriguing part of that. Why did they do that?
Yeah, let's back up. You're right. So who was coming? It was a detachment of soldiers. They were carrying weapons. So now he says, I am. And there's a power surge of some nature. And they fell to the ground. And the implications of this, there are several. I mean, you're right, Al. Because one, even if you take Ephesians 6 and apply this here, where God's given us the armor. You remember at the end he says, and with the feet fitted with the readiness of the gospel. Because in any kind of war situation, when you lose your feet, you're in trouble. That's usually... not in every case, but in most cases, once you go down, you're probably going to stay down because you're going to die.
Right.
And so I do think it was an authority issue and a spiritual war issue going on at the same time. When Jesus said, I am, I mean, he was there to be arrested. He was playing along. But why have this happen? I mean, is it to show? I mean, I don't know. What do you think, Al?
I don't know. It intrigued me when I got into it because I hadn't really thought that much about it, to be honest with you. I mean, we studied John, and I hadn't really put that together as much as this particular study. But I thought, I'm like you, it struck me as something different this time, that was some sort of show to some other place, maybe other than just in that moment, that, oh, wait a minute, I'm still the I am.
Well, yeah, and the same thing happened to Pharaoh, too, when that I am, if you look in the Old Testament and find that somewhere, there's a blowdown. There's another blowdown occurred when that was uttered. And so it was not unprecedented, but for Jesus, I think it was a last sign of what he was giving up for us.
I think so too.
He's basically, the song, he could have called 10,000 angels and yes, But, well, do you want me to finish reading this?
Yeah, read
Let me
it.
finish reading
we're
it, and then
almost out of time, and then we'll talk about it in overtime because we're almost out of time for this.
Okay. So then in verse 7, again, he asked them, who is it you want? And they said, Jesus from Nazareth. I told you that I am he. But he actually said, I told you that I am. Jesus answered, if you are looking for me, then let these men go. This happened so that the words he had spoken would be, well, of all things, that's our word for the day, would be fulfilled. He came to fulfill the law and the prophets. Mm-hmm. I have not lost one of those you gave me. So he's protecting the group that he's with. And it's the sign of what's going to happen on the cross. This is getting into the Romans 5:8. While you were sinners, Christ loved it. I mean, he's protecting. So then Simon Peter, who had a sword, drew it, struck the high priest's servant, cutting off his ear. And Jesus commanded, "Put your sword away. Shall I not drink the cup," which was a sign from the Old Testament of justice and suffering, the Father has given me. And so he ultimately would take our sins and take our place and justify us through the suffering he was fixed to incur. I mean, it's an incredible, great
it's really good stuff.
Picture of Jesus, the I am. Yeah.
So we're out of time. This has kind of been an overview of this idea of the I am. We'll finish up that overview in our overtime. So if you want to follow us over, blazetv.com/unashamed. And then next podcast, we'll actually get into some of those 7 metaphorical statements of the I am. So see you in overtime.
Thanks for listening to the Unashamed podcast. Help us out by rating us on iTunes. And don't miss an episode by subscribing on YouTube, and be sure to click that little bell to get notified about new episodes. And for even more content that you won't get anywhere else, subscribe to Blaze TV at blazetv.com/unashamed.